you for joining us today. The ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Program, How Things Work, the Legal Edition, which is a rapid response project that addresses how our civil rights are being impacted by actions being taken by the new administration. My name is Mario Sullivan, and I'm the chair of the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our conversation today. This videos are unique opportunity to address what is happening in America today, clarifying any misinformation or disinformation being spread, and how civil rights and social justice advocates can act to protect everyone's rights. Today's topic is going to focus on the recent decision that is authorizing the administration's firing of federal workers. It is a critical topic more than ever today, as the current situation and administration continues to remove workers from essential federal services. We will examine how these issues intersect with the principles of justice and equity as I guide our work in our section and in the ABA generally. I'm excited to have with us today Fatima Graves, who is with the National Women's Law Center. She'll be talking to us about this topic and as well as letting us know about her experience and dedication to dealing with these particular issues. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Fatima, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the National Women's Law Center is?
So glad to be here. So at the National Women's Law Center, we fight for gender justice. We fight to protect the rights of women and girls. We do it through the courts, through Congress, and through our culture. And we were founded more than 50 years ago, the same year that Title IX passed, a year before Roe. So we've been in it a long time. And the other thing I want to name is that we look at our laws, our policies, and our culture and work as three critical areas to really affect women and girls' lives. So sometimes our work might include public messaging, sometimes it is litigation to block and delay harmful things. Sometimes it is passing a big, audacious law that transforms people's lives. We also have an action fund that does even more narrative change and political work.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of important work, and we're glad to have the center here with us today. So as mentioned earlier in the introduction, that this last term, Supreme Court cleared the way for Trump administration to implement executive orders, which called for mass reductions in several different federal administrative agencies. Can you give us a brief overview of the court's decision?
Sure. Before I get into the court's decision, I actually think I have to actually talk about the human impact and the many workers that are impacted by these layoffs. The federal government is the largest employer in the United States with over 2.3 million federal workers, about 1.1 million women. And they are workers who have often gone into federal service because they want to make a difference. And it has come with lower salaries than the private sector over time, but typically more certainty, more security, more stability. It's also been a critical path to middle class for many, many workers in this country. And the last thing I just want to name is, many women and people of color really made up the majority of the workforce in many federal departments that have seen the most significant cuts, like the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, and Housing and Urban Development. So we think about this as having really a decimating effect on the services they provide, but also the humans who have been affected by this chaos. But I actually think the most important part of the decision that came down is actually looking at Justice Jackson's dissent. Because she made the really important and fundamental point when in our history, when you have seen significant government restructuring, and we have seen that sort of restructuring over time, new agencies, consolidation of the agencies separating, these have always been acts of Congress authorizing this level of shifting how their money is going to be spent. the district court had made a determination that the agencies would not be able to fulfill either their mission or the specific lines of work that Congress had authorized them to do, or the specific spending with those sorts of structural changes and the dramatic and vast layoffs that the administration had put in place. And so what the lower court had done is really granted a stay of those cuts while the litigation had continued. And now we're in a situation where the court is basically saying the administration could go forward with these unprecedented and unsanctioned by Congress cuts while that litigation continues. And the level of dismantling that has been happening, it will not be easy to undo. These are not flipping light switches on and off for either the programs that benefit people's lives or the actual workers who have been whipsawed these last few months by this administration.
Yeah, indeed. Do you think overall this is kind of the Trump's administration? We've seen them attacking DEI. Is this part of, do you think this is part of kind of their plan as they continue to attack? You know, you mentioned earlier that the majority of, or substantial amount of the government workers are women and women of color. And of course, there's many other demographics within those employees as well.
I think this administration doesn't actually have any consistent understanding of what they mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. In general, it's being used as a reason to harm wide swaths of people, to put forward agendas that are largely illegal, and to, in many cases, undermine our democracy, in part because they know anytime that you say DEI, and I will add anytime you say mention trans people or maybe mention immigrants, they are able to, in our culture and sometimes even in our courts, claim outsized power to do things that are often unprecedented and inconsistent with actually how the rule of law is. I actually think this is just really a part of a larger strategy to weaken our federal government, to consolidate power within the White House, and to make it harder for there to be any meaningful, rigorous check on things that this administration does.
And what do you think ultimately this impact would be as they continue to weaken the federal agencies and essentially usurping congressional power?
Well, what we have seen so far, I will say, is an escalation in benefits and cuts that are largely designed to put more money in the pockets of billionaires and a handful of our sector. We've seen a supercharging of the anti-immigration agenda that they have been pushing, um, diverting agencies that are typically focused on one thing to be focused on undermining the lives of not just immigrants, but people who are Black and brown in this country who are now being subject to an extra and hyper militarization in their communities. And it's also designed to any meaningful dissent. And that is one of the things that I have a real worry about. If career service officials know that they are likely to be fired for contesting, for bringing their expertise to the table, for maybe suggesting when things are not legal, that might come with losing their job, you are less likely to see federal civil servants show up and fulfill their role. And I do think, you mentioned earlier whether this is an assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I actually think that it's an assault on our broader civil rights protections that have been around for 60 years, protections that are for sure bigger than modern notions of what it takes to make institutions more diverse or more equitable. These are longstanding mandates that are in congressional passed statutes that are feeling very fragile at this moment, not just because the administration is not enforcing them, but because they are trying to flip them on their head and say that they do not have the same power as they used to.
And so now we talked a little bit earlier about the court's decision and that it just lifted the stay on the government from being prohibited from firing in the federal administrations. Um, and the litigation is still going, but what can we do to help fight back or in a way lessen the effect of the administration's continued firing and dismantling of certain federal agencies?
So the most important thing is that people should not accept this as the reality. The moment we start to say, well, I guess this is just how our federal government works now, and there's nothing we can do, that will become a self-fulfilling idea. And in fact, the federal government and the executive branch in general does have built-in accountability. There is an executive branch, but there is also Congress and the courts and the people. And when I think about the role of Congress here, it is real and it is meaningful. And I know that in many ways, it seems like Congress has basically abdicated its constitutional obligations to be that meaningful check on executive overreach, but they are the ones that are most accountable to people. And so people can reach out to their representatives. They can demand that they speak up for federal employees. They should be calling their members of Congress and their senators. Um, and making that case all the time. There are annual funding bills that are coming up, and there will be a question around whether the administration has more authority, whether they get an opportunity to make additional cuts or not. And then they also should be calling on senators to demand that they oppose extreme judges who will continue to facilitate this administration's dismantling of the federal government. And so there's a lot people can do to weigh in and actually make the other institutions work as they should.
Which makes the upcoming elections next year even ever more important as we
Yeah,
look.
but we can't wait for the election. But Congress, members of Congress are representing people in real time, and there are lots of ways for their constituents to remind them of that.
Yes, definitely calling their senator or congressperson's office, and if they don't answer, send them letters and emails. And continuing to do it is definitely a good strategy to get their attention and hopefully get a fire underneath them to do something about protecting what our rights and fundamental rights that we've had and shared for many years. Um, is there anything else that you would want to add that came out of the decision from the Supreme Court as we kind of wrap things up for this particular topic?
The only thing I want to add is we should not overstate what it has said. There have not been final rulings around the total authority. There are far more rulings on who can bring these lawsuits, whether they can be stayed while the litigation continues, rather than getting to the heart of the heart. And I realize that for everyday people, that has real implications, but it is important for the rule of law and basically public trust in these institutions for us not to concede and advance anything that has not been taken away.
Thank you. And I think one also important takeaway is to make sure that those who are listening to us today, that you call your senator, you call your congressperson, and let them know that we're not going to stand by and just see these continue to happen, and that they should stand up to the administration and do their duty under their constitutional duty, and keeping the separated powers. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing your light on what is happening here and a very important topic, and how it's definitely going to be impacting our community. We will talk some more about what the effects are of the downsizing of the federal agencies in a separate rapid response program. But to everyone who's joining us today, thank you for being a part of this important topic and dialogue. Be sure to reach out to your congressperson or senator. Let them know that they should do their duty and make sure that the administration and the separation of powers are being upheld. The issues we explore today are complex and challenging, but by coming together in a space like this, we're taking meaningful steps towards progress. Remember, the work doesn't just stop here, it continues with the action we take in our communities, our workplace, and within the ABA. I encourage you to stay engaged with the ABA's section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and become a member if you aren't one. Visit our website, explore upcoming events, and consider joining one of our committees to help share in the work that we're doing. You can do so by visiting ambar.org/CRSJ. Once again, thank you for watching. Keep fighting, and together we will make sure we can make a difference. Thank you.